Good morning, everyone. We're going to talk about hydration and the development of a resource that we developed at BNF. And I'm going to touch on red meat in the diet and some of the headlines that can surround red meat. So in terms of hydration, last year, in June 2013, we published a paper in Nutrition Bulletin entitled Improving Hydration in Children, a Sensible Guide. And this paper came about as a result of a relationship that we had with the Hydration Council. Prior to the publication of this paper, we published a review in 2010 entitled Hydration and Health, a review, and this led to our Healthy Hydration Guide for adults. Following on from this adult guide, we teamed up with the Natural Hydration Council to provide advice on healthy hydration in those aged 4 to 13 years. And this was for the development of another visual guide, which was the Healthy Hydration Guide for Children. The aim of the guide was to provide sensible guidelines about approximate amounts that children should drink and the most appropriate drinks that they should consume. The idea being is that we would help healthcare providers, those looking after children, parents, teachers, to make informed choices about the most suitable drinks for their children. The resulting article outlines the background and advice given to the Natural Hydration Council by BNF, which led to the development of the guideline. So why do we need water? Why is hydration important? Well, we simply cannot live without water. It makes up a large proportion of our body weight. Almost 2/3 of our body is made up of water, and this is distributed throughout our body, as is illustrated in the diagram here. It is a major component of body fluids, for example, blood, saliva and urine, which all perform different important functions within the body. In general, our body has a tightly controlled mechanism with which to regulate the concentration of solutes in body fluids and is sensitive to even very small changes in hydration. The amount of water in our body is adjusted to make sure that the concentration of solutes in our body fluid is more or less constant. In terms of hydration in children, the body water content of newborns is about 75%. This decreases with age to about 60% in older children and adults, and children are less heat tolerant than adults, and therefore they have a greater susceptibility to dehydration, especially during physical activity and in hot climates. Mild dehydration, so about 1 to 2% loss of body mass due to fluid loss, can result in tiredness, headaches, a lack of concentration and dry skin. In terms of the hydration in school children, it's important for you to know that the brain is 73% water, so poor hydration affects its function. So if you want your children to perform better in the classroom, you need to make sure that they are hydrated. Dehydration can decrease their concentration levels, it can lower their cognitive and physical performance, and even mild dehydration can result in impaired cognitive function. The evidence suggests that children arrive at school with hydration deficit, and once they arrive, they're not drinking enough fluids. Studies shown that 60% were inadequately hydrated. That's a large study of 452 students aged 9 to 11 years. In another study, it showed that 71% did not drink enough fluid throughout the school day. And a small research study has shown that an additional glass of water, so about 200 mils, significantly improved the ability in tasks that involved visual attention and fine motor skills. Now, this was a small study, so it was 15 participants aged 8 to 9 years. However, it's important to point out that this study did not measure hydration before the intervention, so it's not known whether they were already in a state of dehydration, whether the additional fluid was correcting hydration levels, or whether the additional fluid added extra benefit to being adequately hydrated. Also, water was only provided during allocated tasks, and therefore more research is needed within this area. Therefore, additional fluid during the school day could have a positive impact on their performance. However, there are certain barriers in terms of hydration in the school setting. It's not cool or fashionable to drink water, and sometimes there may be difficulty for children to access water during the school day. In addition, there may be issues relating to consumption not being actively encouraged, typically in relation to concerns regarding trips to the fountain or toilet breaks, which can be seen to be disruptive to the class setting. So how much do children need? The amount of fluid children need depends on many factors, including their age, their gender, the weather, and their physical activity levels. Generally, they should drink about 6 to 8 glasses of fluids per day, and this is on top of the water that they would take from the food provided in their diet. Young children need relatively smaller drinks, for example about 150 ml servings, and older children need larger drinks, so about 250 to 300 ml. And the amounts illustrated in this table are based on the European Food Safety Authority dietary reference values for fluids. These are recommendations for adequate intakes under conditions of moderate environmental temperature and physical activity levels. Moving on to the development of the Healthy Hydration Guide. When we worked on developing the guide, we considered suitable drinks in accordance with dental guidelines and caffeine and acidity content, as well as the presence of essential nutrients. The key nutrients in this guide are based on the most suitable drinks for children aged 4 to 13 years, outlined as follows: to drink plenty of water, to have milk regularly, to have fruit juices in moderation. They can have smoothies once a day, have low-calorie soft drinks just occasionally, have soft drinks containing sugar just occasionally, and have tea and coffee just occasionally and only in small amounts if caffeinated. And you can find the guide at the link below on this. In terms of tips to keep children hydrated, particularly during the school setting, you should ensure that they have a drink before school, so i.e. with breakfast, and before and during playtime. Offer them drinks regularly, such as water, milk, fruit juice, and low-calorie drinks, to ensure that drinks are always available for them to consume, and to remember that foods can contribute to their fluid intakes, and to always pack a water bottle, especially if you're taking the children out on trips, and in their lunch boxes. Following publication of this paper on hydration guidelines for children, we had a large amount of papers within the Nutrition Bulletin on the topic of hydration. So what we decided to do was we recently published a virtual issue on hydration and health, and this is available at the link below. And basically it entails 13 different articles covering the topic of hydration that may be of use to you in some way. These are all now free to download from the website, and they include the review on hydration, the article on developing the guide for children, and many other articles that may interest you. We also have supporting resources on our website. We have the original Healthy Hydration Guide for adults. We have a poster inside of previous education news aimed at younger students entitled "Are You Drinking Plenty?" This poster is a good way to record how much water the class is drinking over a week and to teach them about the messages on the importance of hydration. There are also podcasts and Ask the Expert interviews from our conference on hydration, it was a few years back. And then lastly, there is the Healthy Hydration Guide for children that we talked about today. So that's it on hydration. Now we're going to move on to red meat in the diet. Today I'm going to just recap the importance of red meat in our diet and highlight some of the stories in the media surrounding red meat, illustrating why it's important to consider the evidence behind the headlines so that you can make informed decisions about the foods you choose to consume. Back in 2011, we published a review article in Nutrition Bulletin, Red Meat in the Diet, an Update. This review covered consumption, nutritional content, effects of red meat on health and chronic disease, and some sustainability issues. In terms of the nutritional content of red meat, it has a high biological value protein, and the protein in meat is complete, meaning that it contains all amino acids that the body can't make on its own. Red meat also contains important micronutrients essential for good health, and healthy balanced diets can include lean meat in moderate amounts. And the Eat Well plate indicates that we should include some meat, fish, eggs, beans, and other non-dairy sources of protein within our diet. Red meat also provides us with energy. The energy in meat is variable. Meat from all sources contributes to 18% of our total energy intake, and red meat to 12% of our total energy intake, according to the National Diet and Nutrition Survey in 2008-09. It also contains virtually no carbohydrate. It consists principally of protein, and it has a variable fat amount. The importance of red meat in the diet, it contains a large variety of micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals. According to the EU labelling legislation, beef, lamb and pork can be classified as a source or a rich source of several nutrients. If a serving of meat provides 15% of the EU recommended daily allowance, it can be considered as a source of the nutrient concerned, When it contains greater than 30% of the RDA, it can be considered a rich source of the nutrient concerned. So as you can see from this table, meat contains a huge variety of micronutrients, so vitamins and minerals, of importance to our diets. This table shows the contribution that meat and meat products make to the intakes of those vitamins and minerals that the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition identified as being of concern in our diet, so low in our diet. And as you can see from the table, meat and meat products contribute more than 30% of people's intakes of zinc and vitamin B12, for example. So now I'm going to move on to some of the headlines surrounding red meat consumption in our diets. So as you can see, they tend to attract quite a few media headlines, many of which can be negative. However, it's not all bad. There are positive headlines too. The problem is with all of these messages in the media that people can become confused. It's not surprising that we're confused about whether or not it's safe to eat red meat. So I've decided to give you an example of some facts behind the headlines. At BNF, we feel that it is important to highlight the facts behind the headlines when the media very clearly gets it wrong. And we do this via our website and via publications in the Nutrition Bulletin Journal. So we have a section on facts behind the headlines. So these are some headlines that occurred in 2012. So red meat is blamed for 1 in 10 early deaths. Eating meat can kill you. Red meat raises death risk by 13%, study finds. And red meat kills. And these are based on a study that suggested that adding an extra portion of unprocessed red meat to our daily diet would increase the risk of death by 13%. The thing that I want you to consider today is what the headlines were based on in any given study that you read in the papers. This was based on a paper published in the Archives of Internal Medicine. It was entitled Red Meat Consumption and Mortality. In terms of the precise details of the study, this was a large study. It looked at diets and health of over 120,000 people, and these people were followed up over a 28-year period. 37,000 were men and 83,000 were women. The baseline, so originally commenced in 1986 and 1980 for these two groups of participants. Information was taken from the Nurses' Health Study, so the female cohort was from there, and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study. In this study, their diets were assessed, so they looked at their diets using a validated food frequency questionnaire, but they did this every 4 years. They also looked at data on the cause of death, and they looked at in relation to cardiovascular disease and cancer. In terms of any relationship between red meat and cardiovascular disease, I'd just like to point out that although red meat contains saturated fatty acids, a high intake of which can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, it also contains other fatty acids. So for example, your N3, your polyunsaturated fatty acids, and your monounsaturated fatty acids, as well as important micronutrients that I've illustrated already, such as B vitamins and selenium. And it's thought that these may decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease. So lean red meat can be part of a healthy diet for reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. When we move on to the study findings, we see that they found that consuming 1 serving of unprocessed red meat per day, so that is 1 extra portion of steak, lamb or pork per day, so it's about 85 grams, size of a pack of cards, or about 3 slices of roast beef, for example, that 1 serving increased the risk of early death by 13% according to the study, that it increased the risk of death from cardiovascular disease by 18%, and that it increased the risk of death from cancer by 10%. When they looked at data for processed red meat, so this includes hams, sausages and burgers, so adding an extra 2 rashers or a sausage to your breakfast, or having a hot dog, for example, they found that there was a 20% increased risk of early death, there was a 21% increased risk of death from cardiovascular disease, and a 16% increased risk of death from cancer. When we take a closer look at the data, the researchers estimated that 9.3% of early deaths, there were 9.3% estimates of early deaths in men and 7.6% in women. These could have been prevented if all of the participants had consumed fewer than 0.5 servings per day. So that's about 42 grams per day of meat. But in considering these findings, you need to actually look at what the study was about. So examine the type and the methods used. So when we look at this, you can see that this was an observational study. So they were observing people in their natural state, and these people were observed over a period of time. And in observational studies, they can only suggest an association. They do not show a cause and effect. The method by which they measured food intake was using a food frequency questionnaire, and this was completed every 4 years, and the individuals were asked about their food intake in the previous year. So there could be reporting or recall errors within this. And also participants were mainly white professionals. And you can't, is this generalizable to the other populations? Is it representative of our population? And overall, although this was a well-conducted study, it could not conclusively prove that red meat raises the risk of premature death. According to UK dietary surveys, 4 in 10 men and 1 in 10 women eat more than 90 grams of red and processed meat a day. This study talked about 85 grams per day. There is another slide that I added into this yesterday, given some of the headlines that took place this week. So this is just to provide you with another example as to how the headlines, the media stories, can be misleading. So you may have seen in the papers, meat lovers are twice as likely to die. Meat-rich diet is harmful as smoking. High-protein diet is bad for health as smoking. And again, too much protein in middle age is as bad for you as smoking. What I'd like to illustrate to you today is that again, these headlines come from one study. Again, this was an observational study. It was a study looking at the aspect of it was looking in humans, and there were also studies of cancer incidence in mice. So it was in mice, not humans, elements of it. Data comes from the USA, and they looked at the association between a high protein intake compared to a moderate intake and a low protein intake. So in terms of the high protein intake, this was about 20% or more of your calories from protein. Moderate was 10 to 19%, and low was 10%. Within the data set, they looked for associations. So again, associations between high protein intake and disease or death. And when they looked at all of the subjects over 50 years, they found an association with diabetes-related deaths, but not with overall mortality. When looking only at the subjects between the ages of 50 to 65 years, they found a significant association with cancer and all-cause mortality. This association existed for protein from all sources, but was higher for animal protein than for protein from plant sources, hence the headlines in terms of meat. The authors themselves suggest that this is a causal link, and that the reason that protein increases the risk of cancer and death is because it increases levels of the growth hormone IGF. When they looked at those with a high protein diet over age 65 years, there was actually a decreased risk. And another thing, again, I'm highlighting is that this was an observational study. So it shows an association but cannot prove causation. There's no way to be sure that the variable measured is causing the effect in observational studies, or that another factor in the lifestyles of those taking part caused it. The other lifestyle factors from the small number of people eating a low protein or low animal diet may have contributed to these findings. For example, greater consumption of fruit and vegetables. Also, very importantly, this was an 18-year study in which diet was measured only once. Subjects gave an account of what they had eaten in the last 24 hours at the beginning of the study. So 18 years ago, they gave this information. And this was the basis of their classification into the high, medium, or low protein groups. And this was assumed to be representative of their diet for the duration of the study. Overall, the design of this study does not allow any clear conclusions to be drawn about the effect of protein or animal protein intakes in middle age, and the mechanism suggested for this link is not well established. The take-home message that I'd like you to take home with you today, for this and other headlines really, is that caution should be taken when looking at single, fairly small observational studies in a very complex subject area such as cancer and diet, and making direct recommendations from them. So when you consider both of the examples given to you today, the facts behind the headlines, it is clear that red meat really won't kill you after all. What I'd like you to remember from today, when reading your newspaper stories in the future, is that you need to consider the evidence as it's presented. Is the study in cells? Is it in animals? Or is it in humans? There are also various different types of studies in scientific research, and they all have different strengths and limitations. The quality of the study relates to the degree to which bias is minimized, and bias means something that will cause a consistent deviation from the truth. And the likelihood of study results being biased depends on the type of study design and the quality of the methods used in the study, as I've tried to illustrate to you today. For example, if the studies are in meta-analyses and systematic reviews of high-quality studies, these are considered to be the gold standard. Importantly, an association does not make for causation. Randomized controlled trials are considered the best type of study for providing evidence on the effectiveness of an intervention, so i.e. to determine a cause and effect. And observational studies, as cited today, are studies where the subjects are observed in their natural state, so for example, cohort studies, case-control studies, and cross-sectional studies. And these are more prone to bias. They provide weaker evidence of the effectiveness of interventions than randomized controlled trials. And what you have to remember here is that newspapers are there to make money. First and foremost, journalists are looking for a compelling story. They're looking for a good headline, and the more sensational, the better. So, in terms of meat, meat and meat products can make an important contribution to nutrient intakes in the diet. Within the context of a healthy, varied diet, lean red meat contributes protein, long-chain N3 fatty acids, and micronutrients such as iron, zinc, selenium, and vitamin D, and vitamins B3 and B12. Some of these nutrients are more bioavailable in meat than plant food sources, and some have been identified by the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition as being in short supply in our diets. So we need to take these nutrients in. Most healthy balanced diets will include lean meat in moderate amounts, together with starchy carbohydrates, plenty of fruit and vegetables, and moderate amounts of milk and dairy foods. The thing is, what I want you to remember from today also is how much you should eat. So what are the recommendations? For example, the World Cancer Research Fund recommend that to reduce the risk of cancer, you should eat no more than 500 grams, so 70 grams per day. That's cooked weight per week of red meats like beef, pork, and lamb. And that you should avoid processed meats such as ham, bacon, salami, hot dogs, and some sausages. In terms of any link between cancer and red and processed meat, the evidence suggests that eating a lot of red meat probably increases the risk of bowel cancer. Whilst any association between red meat and cancer at other sites remains inconclusive. Most of the evidence of the association between red meat and colorectal cancer shows an increase in risk of colorectal cancer in the highest consumers of red meat, so it's a take-home message today, compared to the lowest consumers, although most of the studies to date have not reached statistical significance. In terms of UK government advice, they are in agreement with the World Cancer Research Fund. The UK Department of Health states that red meat can be consumed as part of a healthy, balanced diet, that adults who eat greater than 90 grams of red and processed meat should decrease their intake to 70 grams per day on average. And this recommendation is based on findings from the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, where they found that people who eat a lot of red or processed meat, so greater than 90 grams per day, are at a greater risk of bowel cancer. So cutting down to an average of 70 grams per day can reduce this risk. Now I'm just going to show you how much 70 grams of red meat is, so bear with me. If you want to see some more information in terms of facts behind the headlines, they're available on our website. Also, a good site is NHS Choices. They often do the stories behind the news, explain what is behind the headlines, and a nutrition bulletin. In every issue there's usually a facts behind the headlines. For more information, please go to our website. Thank you.